Hello everyone, Kenti Tiger here with Bengali Engineering and Play. We are back in Space Engineers and continuing on with our, I'll call it the basic survival tutorial. Now, the idea behind this is to give you some ideas on survivability in a new world. Now, this one is focused mostly in space. Most of these ideas you're going to be able to take and put them on the surface of a planet as well. There's two ideas to remember about planets versus space. There is no gravity, relatively speaking, in space. Obviously, within gravity wells, there's gravity, and because gravity wells exist in space, then that's not entirely a true statement, but conceptually, when you're in space, at least within this game, there's no gravity to speak of. When you're on a planet surface or near a planet surface, then obviously gravity well theory applies, and you should proceed accordingly. A lot of things when it comes to the gravity well are large-scale deviation from the norm in space. Obviously, when you're working with your jetpack, it's a matter of moving and then arresting that movement. So basically, Newton's laws, an object in motion stays in motion until acted upon by an opposing force. When you're inside the gravity well, obviously you are fighting gravity. Gravity is going to pull you back to the surface. So you're going to go through a lot more hydrogen if you are bouncing around in air and want to use your jetpack. So keep that in mind. Number two, along that same lines, is when you're trying to use vessels, then the same theories are applicable in space versus on the planets, or rather within a gravity well. You have to build ships according to where you are, to put it mildly. And we're not really getting into the ship's idea. We did build a miner. And that miner was space-based, and the reason why I say that miner was space-based, it's actually still sitting over here. The reason why I say it's space-based is because ion thrusters work in space. They are very ineffective within atmospheres. You can get away with it in the upper atmosphere, but by the time you get down to about 10,000 kilometers from the ground, they're going to be virtually useless. If you get into the 5 or 6, then as the saying goes, put your head between your legs and kiss your ass goodbye, because they are not helping you. It's not the rapid plummet to the ground, but the sudden stop at the bottom that will do you in, as well as your dear precious vessel. So, thrusters make a big difference as far as what you're doing. So anyway, without getting into those kinds of theories, because this is really, again, more space-based. However, this particular episode is focusing on base building. And why do I say base building? Because ultimately, whether you're in space or on the ground, a lot of your theories for building a base are the same. You need certain things in your base for you to be able to effectively survive and continue, dare I say, prosper. And I did another basic philosophical kind of a tutorial on what do you need. And for those of you who remember that particular video, this will be very familiar. I pulled this back in because it's a good example of, I want to say, everything you need. And the reason why I say everything you need is because it does represent all those, the 4 basic survivability theorems that I postulated for you. Power, hydrogen and oxygen, the ability to take raw materials and turn them into usable materials, which is to say a refinery, the ability to take those usable materials, turn them into components which you're going to use to build things, which is to say an assembler, and then ultimately storage. We need to store all of our materials, whether they be raw materials that we've collected and are still waiting to process, or components, or hydrogen and oxygen bottles. Really, it's all about what you want to store, and the quantity of storage is really about scale. How big do you want to go? This thing, even though it does not necessarily represent those four theorems in order, does pretty much display everything you need in a, I want to say, average base. Now, obviously, you're going to scale this. It's obviously not going to look like this, but you're going to scale this to whatever you need. This kind of has one of everything. So depending on, again, your task, your survivability, you can get as basic or as extravagant as you might want to get. In this example, this tutorial build here that we did is really about, I still want to call this the basics. It's got everything you need in a base. In fact, it's got a few extra things depending on your perspective. So we have the enclosure here, which is kind of the living quarters. This is where you and your colleagues are going to live when you're not outside exposed to the elements. So this is its own little environment, hopefully a reasonably safe one. So that can be anything, and you can go anywhere with that. That's a matter of really your limitations of creativity is really where that limitation, if you can even call it a limitation, really resides. In this case, the whole thing is really about your creativity. Now, in this particular tutorial, I'm not going to get really creative. Now, can you create anything without being creative? Probably the answer is no. This is going to be more the, dare I say, consummate engineers style of building a base. And what do I mean by that? Practicality over greebling, maybe, if we want to use that little more ancient word. Does it need to be fancy? And in a practical sense, no. Does it need to meet all the needs of your endeavors? Yes, it does. So here's some of the ideas. Obviously, the enclosed space here, where we have our medical station, we have our cryo chamber here, we have, as you can see, we have our air vents. Is all part of your living environment. Outside here we have, and I hesitate doing this because the sun is blinding. We have the oxygen generator here, or the gaseous generator. We have an oxygen tank and a hydrogen tank. So those are going to be considerations when you get to that stage. Obviously, this is all in support of this environment. Now, the other aspect is that when you build connectors and ultimately connect on your vessels that you're building, or vessels that are supporting your endeavors, then these oxygen generators, these gas generators, again come into play, because they will help refuel. If you have tanks on those vessels, it will help replenish those tanks. Now, the one of the larger complaints I have, gaseous theory, if a tank is open to another tank and you don't have valves and check valves and that sort of thing in between, then an empty tank next to a full tank, those tanks are going to equalize in pressure. Pressure, volume, however you want to look at that. This game does not work that way. So, for example, we have a full oxygen tank here, a full hydrogen tank. If I were to connect on to this coupler down here, sorry about the blinding sunlight, and put a vessel of some kind on here that had tanks that happened to be empty, the two tanks down here would not change at all. So this is not about an equalization of pressures like you would see, equalization of volumes like you would see, dare I say, in real life, but rather the ability of our gaseous generators to actually fill those tanks. So having a bazillion tanks on a base does not give you any advantage when it comes to docking ships and replenishing ships, unfortunately. So hopefully someday Keen will decide to change that, and they focused a bit on physics, so maybe gas physics, gas dynamics would be something eventually to add. Power. I have, and the reason why I say more than you need, you kind of have to decide whether you're going to go green, which is to say use these solar panels, batteries, or reactors. Now, I won't say that uranium is abundant. You may have to do some searching for uranium, but ultimately uranium is out there. If you are on a planet with the new 186 update, finding minerals is a bit more challenging. They're not as obvious as they were. And I don't know if that's a settings issue. Right now I've got my settings at Alt Max, and I still can't readily see where the resources are nearly as easily as you used to be able to. It used to be you could go, 1,000 meters up, and you look for these dark spots on the ground, and there you go. Now it's a matter of you see the ground, but there's this like discoloration dots kind of a thing. And if we continue this survivability tutorial onto the ground of a planet, then we'll try and point some of those issues out. In terms of space, again, talking about resources, even though that's kind of off topic, is all of these asteroids. And so you see an asteroid right here next to the reticle. You see another one over here. See another one here, 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 here. And of course this great big huge giant one over here. And this again was an insert. The reason I put that there was because it has everything. It's a layered asteroid, so it basically has everything. But we have all these resources, and these are natural game resources here that belong in the game, or rather are part of the game. In this case, this particular world was generated. It's called the infinite normal density. I did try the high density, and I found it to not work. Now, again, my settings are alt high. I'm running UHD, so maybe that's just an aspect of we've gone beyond the limits of the game. I kind of complain about that because if it's a feature of the game, it should work. If it doesn't work, then they should either fix it or remove it, is my philosophy. Now, again, I'm running this in UHD, which obviously UHD being 4 times the pixelation of HD, then maybe I'm asking too much. But anyway, aside from that. So this is normal, which actually prior to the 186 is a bit more than high density, in fact. So I think normal density is plenty enough. You're going to find all of those resources. Again, this was supposed to be about base building, and I've spawned off onto resource gathering. But one of the other things to keep in mind, it's fine and dandy to travel around and GPS mark your resources. However, one of the things to remember is that the asteroids don't actually exist. Even when you are right up next to them, they don't really exist. So what you need to do when you do that GPS map that says there's uranium and gold and nickel here, um, is actually pull out your drill and drill a small hole. And the reason why I say drill a small hole is because when you alter this procedural object, it becomes a real object. And once it becomes a real object, it's no longer procedural. I know that sounds like a duh, but once it's no longer procedural, everything that's in it is in it. It is now generated real in world. It's part of your save game now, and those resources will remain what you thought they were. Um, I know other players have discovered this, that they've taken a lot of time to go and map things, and then they come back to that platinum reserve that they mapped so diligently, and now they need platinum, and all of a sudden discover, where the hell is the platinum? And suddenly they realize that, well, it's not here. It was here when I mapped it with my GPS, but no, it's not here now because it's procedural. So yes, the object is still there. The asteroid is still there, but because it's procedural, then the randomly selected possibly trio of minerals that's in that asteroid might be different than when you mapped it. So, like I said, pull out your drill, put a hole in it, and then it's real. And then those resources will remain what they are because now it's real. It's generated. It's part of your save game. Now that I've gone off on yet another tangent. All right. So what I've done here, you see our satellite here, our utility satellite, our kind of survival satellite thing. And so if we're continuing on in the pure theory of survivability, we have this monster here, and while there's only 2 refineries, there's only a single assembler here, it is a little bit limited, admittedly. But once you have, dare I say, a smaller scale of what you need, then you scale up. You have everything you need to build something bigger, better, faster, right? So the idea here is to get yourself to a point where it's really about collecting these resources and turning those resources into usable products, which is where we are in our particular thing. So we have built this station, not really from scratch, but we have built this station up, completed it. We've added some things onto it that are admittedly not vanilla, but they make our life a lot easier. And some of those were added because of convenience. Some of those were added because I was just too damn frustrated with welding. It was not letting me weld. The idea here is that we are ready to scale up, which is why I brought the base idea here. This platform you see here is what I built for the example. Now this one happens to be 20 blocks by 40 blocks. So it's 20 blocks by 40. Yes, sorry, 20 blocks by 40 blocks. Was there anything I had in mind when I did that? No, it's just a big surface that I can work with. Now, granted, these shadows here are kind of a pain in the butt, but you know, we're gonna have to work with that. We could move this thing around. In fact, maybe I should move this around. Let me see if Space Master's on, and get it up out of the shadow. So let me go ahead and do that. Flipped. Here we go. So we'll go ahead and get that, and I guess I can put it on top here just to get it a little closer to everything we're doing. I wanted this to be here as our mental checklist. It's because I'm gonna build things a bit backwards. We talked about our four theorems of survival, which was our power, our gases, our refining, and our assembling. Um, I'm not gonna build power first. And this is where the scalability and other ideas come into play. We're in base building mode, and to really reach base building mode, you have to have already accomplished those basic survival ideas. We have to somewhere have the ability to recharge our suit, which is really to say a medical bay, some vehicle where we can climb into it and have the cockpit replenish our supplies, whatever that is. Some way to get power. Now, if you're using the cockpit or the medical bay, then obviously the same mechanism fills up your gases, provided you have those gases available. So the idea here is that we have accomplished the basic necessities. So we are survivable now. We have everything we need to survive indefinitely. So we're scaling up, which is what the base idea is about. Now, the reason you can build out of order is exactly because the basic survivable criteria have already been met. So the reason why I build out of order, again, is because I'm trying to build a base that's reasonably practical to what I'm thinking my next tasking is going to be. So I'm scaling up. In my case, I kind of focus on storage first, and there may be some philosophies which say that's a really stupid idea because, after all, why is storage so important? I kind of look at it from the perspective of what are the parameters, what is my intention to continue forward in my game here. What is the next step? In my view, the next step, when we are beyond the basic survival level, that we can survive indefinitely, when we have met and crossed that threshold, then it's about collecting resources and processing resources so we can build other things, whether that be a giant ship, a battleship, something that will get us off this planet, out of this sector of space, whatever that happens to be. So it's really about resource gathering at that point. And the problem with resource gathering is it can be very voluminous, which means I need some place to store all this stuff. So I tend to focus on storage and then scale everything else according to that storage. So is it by philosophy, by design, that I start with storage? Not really. It's just that seems the practical starting place. Once I no longer have survival as my primary goal, which is to say all of the basic needs have been met, then it's on to the more practical approach for things, which means how much stuff am I going to store? Everything else in my base is really going to revolve around that philosophy because survival is no longer the primary topic. So I focus on storage. So if you look at my toolbar here, I've got all these basic things. If we start out from slot number 1, there is the assembler. Now, I did not include at this moment the upgrade modules, and that's not entirely an oversight. It's that we need to build those assemblers in where we can put the upgrade modules in, but that's a little later on. So I ran out of slots on this one toolbar and decided that can wait. That's a later on consideration. We have a light armor block. I'm building in light armor just because. If you have the resources, there's absolutely nothing wrong with building in heavy, depending on where you're at. Obviously, if you're out in space and you're expecting to take damage from enemies, encounters, whatever, then maybe heavy armor is a good idea. The thing to remember with heavy armor is it is going to take more resources. Again, that's kind of a duh statement, but um, what materials you have is really going to drive where you're going with things. So if you can afford it, if you have the patience to build it all, then it might behoove you to use heavy armor. In the case of this tutorial, we're going to use light armor. It was an arbitrary choice. We have the resources to build heavy, but we're going with light. In slot 3 there is our refinery. No way around it. We're kind of back to the survival philosophy. You absolutely have to have a way to take the raw materials, turn them into usable materials. So a refinery ultimately in any base is a must. Slot number 4 is the upgrade module, the yield module for the refineries, or actually the yield module will only work with refineries. That's the only exception out of the 3. Number 5, batteries. I'm a big fan of batteries. Batteries are kind of one of those passive devices out there that when they're on your grid, they just function in the background. They just do what they do. Reactors are a great source of primary power, but there are limitations in the power that they can provide, which is to say a limitation of the amount of power. In this case, we kind of reduce everything down to wattage because we don't talk about voltage. In the case of Space Engineers, it's all about wattage. However you look at that, watt hours, it's a good way to look at it. But wattage. So how much in wattage can we provide? Batteries are not as limited in their draw capability. They can provide, not for very long, but they can provide a lot more usable power in the instantaneous than reactors can. So reactors are great for recharging and that sort of thing, long sustained limited power, but not necessarily these large scale burst powers like you need, such as ion thrusters and that sort of thing. Obviously when you need that heavy draw, you may go well beyond the capability of your reactors, which means your little bar here over on the side is going to go to 100% and stay there. And if you're making planetary interface or something like that, or trying to maneuver in for docking and something like that, your reactor goes to 100%, you have just limited your maneuverability, which is not a good thing when you're docking. The combination of batteries and a source, whether that source be a reactor or solar, should be a part of your consideration when you consider building. I tend to have battery banks, just scads and scads of batteries. I'm kind of the philosophy of I do not want to waste any space at all. So if I have a 1x1 block area that's otherwise useless, I'm going to put battery in it. A base, because it's a static object, it's not movable, weight is no longer a consideration. This is a base, so it's never going to move. You don't have to worry about weight restrictions or that sort of thing. So from that perspective, putting batteries in every nook and cranny is not necessarily a bad idea. Short of, obviously, batteries take resources. So if you do not have the resources available to build all the batteries, then there's another consideration. But if you have resources and your assembler can keep up with it, even if it takes you some time, which is going to, you're building a base, then so be it. Number 6 slot there, obviously conveyors. That happens to be the little plus there that you see is about, you can roll your mouse wheel when you select that and have multiple blocks available to you. Number 7 is a large reactor. Why am I using large reactor instead of small reactor? Bang for the buck. Um, the small reactor provides you with 15 megawatts of power. This guy provides you with 100 megawatts, or maybe it's 300 now, megawatts of power. In fact, I think it is 300, but we'll look at that. So, bang for the buck. It's a 3x3x3 grid. So 27 blocks versus your 1 block for the small. So I guess bang for the buck if I put 27 small reactors, and I don't have a calculator handy, but maybe it is more than what you get from your big one. But anyway, number 8 is a large container. Okay, one of the things to remember, this particular world I have set at 3 times inventory. Why did I do 3 times inventory? 10 times inventory, I love it. I love having inventory. But I kind of, I mean, after all, this is kind of a semblance of survival, right? So do I want my cargo containers to be reasonably infinite? And the answer is no. So this is my version of realism that I'm applying. After all, if I want infinite, then I'll go into my own blocks, and I've got a couple infinite containers there. So this is really about building semi-realistically, and I use the word semi-realistically a bit loosely because after all, this is a game. There are some severe limitations within any game, I think, when it comes to trying to apply reality within a game environment. Number 9 is obviously our solar panels. And solar panels with me are kind of an after effect. And what I mean by that is if you design something with solar panels in mind, then you may end up with a rather bizarre build. Solar panels are big. They are a 1 by 2 by 4 on the large block grids here, and they can be a bit awkward to work with because they are an even number. They're one of the very few blocks that are an even number. Refineries are also even numbers. So when you take those kinds of things, they're a bit more challenging to work with because you don't have a center per se. You have an offset that makes it interesting to work with. So what I usually do is build something and then come back afterwards and figure out, do I have any open spaces where I can paste all these things, bolt these solar panels up, which will give me some extra power. Because after all, free power is free power. If I have solar, a large-scale solar array, or even a smaller solar array, then that's a little less power that my reactors are going to have to come up with to recharge those batteries. It'll use it all, however many you have, however many or however few you have. So that's my toolbar. The idea there was it has everything that I need, at least for right now, to get to where I need to go. And then pick a place. I'm going to pick right over here. And the challenge with putting large objects up is sometimes they can be too big. So the orientation of this thing is really entirely up to you. I like these ribs to be kind of up and down. In this case, I'm going to use the ribs along the long axes of the base. And sorry, I forgot. I was talking about Space Master and then I left it on. So there's our first storage thing. I like to build, let me get that off the screen. I like to build bases as if they're bases. And here's what I mean by that. I could just put a boatload of storage containers in and then wall it in and have, you know, some way to get materials in and out. So my conveyor system. In this case, I want something that I can actually walk into. So what I'm going to do here is create a storage bay. And my storage bay is going to be cargo containers. And I was thinking 4 high, 2 wide, or 2 high. And I don't know why that's not letting me build. Oh, because I don't have any steel plate. Interior plate is what I need. Alright, so let's go grab some interior plate, and in fact steel plate as well. So, okay, transferring large volumes at a time. Control will transfer 10. Shift will transfer 100. Control shift will transfer 1,000. Okay, so you just saw the 1,000 come across. So I'm going to carry these two things. Obviously, with the standard astronaut suit, you're not going to be able to transfer that many. But having 100 is probably going to last you a while. So, whoop, go up and over that. All right. So, having said that, now the BRS system is working on the utility satellite here, so hopefully it will be able to assist me in building. So I'm going to be able to put this thing down, and then hopefully the unit itself will build for me. I'm going to do 4. And the reason I'm doing 4 is because I'm actually gonna stack. So there's another one there, and another one there, and another one here. Alright, now why am I stopping with 7 on this side? And that is because I'm gonna need a couple more things that I didn't get to put in here. So let's go tank. I need an oxygen tank, which we're going to put there, a hydrogen tank, which we're going to put there, and then generator, our standard gas generator. In this case, I need a single hydrogen tank, because remember, I'm gonna put it upright just because it's the same size as the large container, so it fits. So here's what we have. Let me turn this off. Here's what we have is these 4 by 2. So in this case we have 7, but I want to build 2 rows as my storage container here. Now, one of the other things that you folks might have noticed is that I put a gap of 1. Why did I put a gap of 1? Because I want to put a layer of armor out there. So I don't just want these exposed to the universe, I actually want them to be protected behind something. Alright, so this is my second row, and what I was talking about is being able to walk down this center. So I put a gap in here very specifically, and this is my ability to walk into my storage room. And this is part of my realism in base building, is that realistically, if I am an engineer building this base, then I would eventually have to come in here and do maintenance. And if I just build a great big huge room and put conveyors into it, and I can't actually access that room, how do I do maintenance on it? Now, am I going off the deep end here within the parameters of the game? Perhaps so, because after all, you don't actually do maintenance. Other than meteor strikes and that sort of thing, nothing is going to deteriorate the blocks once you build them. So philosophy of building, I guess, is my excuse there. That's my aspect of creativity. There's such a fine dividing line here between where you can paste and where you're actually in the some of the other frustrating aspects of this game that they just absolutely fucking refuse to fix. But okay, now power. Power is, as always, an interesting concept. Does one want to put power in the same place as a storage room? I actually tend to build reactor rooms separate. I was thinking because it's a 3x3 grid that I might as well just build kind of my utility room in here. And I think just because we're building a base from scratch, that I might as well go ahead and build a reactor room separately. Alright, so I talked about the build and repair system doing what it does, and I appear to have lied, which is really the result here, or the reason why these are not working, is because I turned them off. And I turned them off. In fact, let me go ahead and before I turn them on. The problem with the build and repair system is, depending upon your settings, the build and repair system will dismantle everything that is unowned. Now, an armor block is inherently not ownable. And what I mean by that is there is no ownership status of a block. It inherits the status from the grid. So if the items on the grid are owned by you, then the armor blocks are inherently also owned by you. So the problem there is, when you're using the build and repair system, if you're building a new block and you put a new block down, with the build and repair system on and unowned blocks being grindable as far as settings goes, it will grind down that block for you. Even though you're the one that built it, even though you're the one that wants it there, it will grind it down for you. So regardless of the fact that it's not a grinding color, the only way to get around that would actually be to set your ignore color as your building color, and then it would work fine. Then you get by with it. But what I did when I was building this platform was to just turn them off. It's just easier to turn them off. So I did. Letting our energy replenish here. Alright. control panel access. BRS array, you notice is turned off, and we will turn that on. So it should go to work here building all of these containers. Alright. You can either build as you go. That was not what I wanted. Control. G. Try the G again. Vent. Put this here for convenience so I don't have to keep shifting back and forth. One of the things that I tend to do as far as building philosophies go is I build everything and then I encase it afterwards. But in this case, this is going to be a space, but it's a space that's inside I'm gonna point them this direction, somewhat arbitrary, but so I'm going to put 4 vents in here, and the reason I put, how is that? Couldn't even begin to explain that one. Here's the idea. This is a pretty large room. It is consumed by storage containers, yes, but it's still a pretty good sized room. So what I want to do, let me go ahead and put, we want our sliding doors, which gives us the means to, there we go. So I want to create an airlock, so I'm going to put 2 of them down, and then go back to number 2 and start putting up blocks. I'm gonna go ahead and put a conveyor junction there, and the reason I'm putting that there is because I think that would be a good location for, we'll put 2 or 3 conveyors on the outside here, and then put a connector, so that may be a good docking port for future. go ahead and put up this this outer wall here. This does take a little bit of time, obviously. Do this in stages here. Thankfully, we do have the build and repair system helping us here, which is always a nice thing. Now, obviously, I'm using my base color, my tiger orange here. And some people tend to build in the gray, the standard, default color, and then come back and colorize later. It's really up to you how you build. Infinite number of variations there for obvious reasons. My philosophy is I'm going to build and do it in my base color rather than the default color. I kind of colorize as I go. So this is my version of the tiger stripes. Is I tend to do the corners in tiger stripe. All right, let me go ahead and grind this particular block. Actually, yeah, I will grind that because I can always use. Back over to number 2, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do here yet. I think we're going to do that. And then eventually we will change this outer block to something else. Either that or yeah, we'll do that. That's eventually the idea. All right, so we have some things that are not building. So the nice thing about the build and repair system, and in fact the nanite control factories are the same way. If you look at what they're telling you, they will tell you. So you notice here we've got green, which means they're powered, but you also see red and yellow. Red and yellow mean, and there's in the description page, will tell you what all these mean. But what it means is that, so we're trying to build a large cargo container, and we need construction components. Obviously a whole shit ton of construction components. So let's go ahead and go into production, construction components here, and let's go ahead and queue up 5,000 of those. And yes, it's going to take a little while to create all those, but they'll go into storage and we can use them. And eventually we will transfer everything from our satellite station over to our new base. And in fact, we could deconstruct our base or our utility satellite if we really wanted to. And take all of those parts over as well. All right, so construction components. Wouldn't have thought of that, but construction components. Yep, so you see they started building all over again. All right, The other thing I want to do is I tend to compartmentalize everything. So let me get back to my standard color here. Tiger orange. So I can actually see, I think this is facing the correct way already. Yep. So this is the portion of the airlock inside the room. I'm going to spin this. This is in the bulkhead, in the wall. And then we'll go back to our number 2, which actually we need to go back to the regular blocks. 2, 3, 4. Perhaps another duh statement to those of you who have been playing for a little while, but the thing to keep in mind, did I just paste a block in there? Thing to keep in mind about storage containers is most of them are not airtight. So if you are building, with the intention of airtightness, then you're going to have to build walls around it. So in this case, we have put walls around 3 sides. I'm going to go ahead and build a reactor room. Here. So 6. Change colors back to standard tiger. And we're going to put probably overkill, but overkill can be good. And then back to this. I think I already, yes I did. Alright, so what does that do? It kind of compartmentalizes this other side here. So what I want to do in this case Definitely not that color. So, unfortunately, because this is so close, I don't necessarily have a means to determine. Alright, so here's what I wanted to see, is the 2 ports on the side, which will let me connect these reactors together. Now, it's kind of philosophical how you want to connect these, because ultimately you have redundant paths because I'm going backwards into the cargo containers. So what I want to do in this case, I want to attach them here. And I'm going to spin so I have the connectors up and down. And the reason why I want the connectors up and down is because I want those to go ahead and connect between themselves, up and down, and then from the side to side they can loop back through the conveyors, the cargo. So you see the one up and down, and then side to side. And again, overkill. But I'm going to go ahead and put in 4 reactors. So my philosophy is I want too much power rather than not enough power. What am I going to do down here? I'm going to put batteries in. Just because I'm going to leave a gap. I could put, batteries right up against the reactor, but I'm going to go ahead and not do that. I also like the indicators in the center. So I'm going to do 3 batteries deep because I want it to be the same size as the reactor. And then I'm going to go all the way here to this outer wall, which is this. So imagine how much time you would spend putting in all these batteries by hand and welding up every single one of them. So this is the biggest reason why I use the BRS system, because it helps you to save an awful lot of time. You can actually kind of focus on building rather than welding all the time. So you can lay out your basic design concept and then let the BRS system build the finish rather than the blocks for you. Alright, so there's my rather large scale battery bank. 5 by 6 by 2 deep, right? So 5 by 6 is 30, there's 60 batteries there, or actually that's 3 deep. So 5 by 30 means 90 batteries, which is quite a lot. Let's go ahead and put in our wall. Our bulkhead, if we're talking strict Navy terms. We're going to do the same thing here, even though it's possibly a bit redundant. We're going to go ahead and put in another airlock, just because this is a different space. And back to number 2, where we have our blocks. Now, when it comes to things like how wide do you need to be? So why did I put this particular thing on here? Where is the outer limit of my room? Do I create a room based on an arbitrary size? How do I do that? How much is too much? If we think about things in terms of what do we need a supply of hydrogen. However, the only user of hydrogen when it comes to a base, relative to tanks, is I'm refilling my suit. So how many tanks do I need? Why did I only build the one tank? 2.5 million liters of hydrogen in a standard vanilla tank for hydrogen. That's an awful lot of suit refills. But because all of the air vents in a space draw from oxygen tanks, I actually would have a need when I pressurize for there to be a lot of oxygen tanks. Likewise, I need a certain number of gas generators to be able to keep up with whatever that demand is. So in my philosophy of building, these reactors are 3 by 3 by 3. So obviously I've got 2 stacked. I left a passage here, presumably for the maintenance of the batteries. Does that really hold true because I've got all these batteries in the center here? How am I going to maintain these batteries in the center? When I built the battery bank, I just filled the whole space. Should I really have done that? If I was really thinking about things in terms of maintenance, I would actually have left this middle row empty, or at the very least put holes in there. So I have to have a way to maintain these batteries if I were to apply reality here. So if I did a battery bank on the back wall, on the bulkhead, and then put another one here, one out from the others, meaning I left a gap in between, that's still 60 batteries. Would that be enough to do everything that I needed to do? Probably. So why have I only put one here when perhaps I could put 2 or 3? Because, let's go over to that particular thing. How many do you need? How many oxygen tanks do we need to do what we're going to do here? And this is really where our building philosophy comes in. So I'm going to come over here, and just so I have some reference, I'm going to go ahead and put in my airlock. So here's the airlock for this one. We're going to go back over here and we're going to build this bulkhead. Just like we did on this other one, we're going to build 2 wide. And there's a method to the madness, believe it or not. And the question is really, what are we going to put on this other side? So my concept is that we should have get back over to toolbar number 3, and I like to have these windows visible. So what I'm going to do is flip that upright, and let me spin that so we can see it. So there's this window in the front of gas generators that show its status. So I'm going to flip that around to that side, and how many gas generators do you need? Well, that depends on what you're doing with them. Now, initially, it's nice to have all your tanks full, so having a bunch of gas generators is a great idea. In this case, it's a base. So even though initially I'm going to need to fill up all my tanks, that's not going to hold true forever. I'm not going to be constantly refilling all of these tanks. I'm going to need very little to replenish the supplies once I end up with a lot of once I have the tanks full, then these things are going to be mostly idle. However, I do need a way to fill up any tanks on vessels that come in. So having a fairly large bank of gas generators would be to your advantage, because those tanks on the vessels that dock will fill up faster. Remember, there's no equalization of pressures, so having a bunch of tanks for the sake of, hey, we have a ready supply, doesn't work that way in the game. Okay, I just noticed my timer, which, wow, surprise, surprise, I've gone over again. So we're going to pause here. We're going to build the, we're going to pick up in building the gas generators in the next episode. So this is Kenty Tiger signing off, and we will see you next time.